Yeah, we're live. It's 6:55 and we're live. We're live at 6:55. Yes, it does rhyme. It's an unfortunate rhyme. How's everybody doing? Tonight we're going to talk about the L82 small block 350 Corvette motor. I guess it got its due in the day. I mean, it was the hot-ish 350 carbureted Corvette motor after they got rid of all of the high compression stuff, in the mid 70s. I ran a test on them because we wanted to build, I wanted to do testing on, we did it on all of the DZ302 and the, and the L76, 327 and the LT1, all of the high compression solid lifter cam motors, the muscle car motors. And so there were other things. There were hydraulic versions of those. In fact, arguably the best-selling cam that GM had for a really long time, might still be now. I don't know how many they sold. But the 350 horse 327 camshaft, that camshaft was GM's most popular over-the-counter camshaft. In fact, a lot of solid lifter guys would replace those with those hydraulic cams because it's a set it and forget it thing. And it gives you almost the same performance. It doesn't want to rev out quite as high as those Duntov cams did with the solid lifters. And they don't have the noise of the solid lifter because it's not, especially if you had 30,000 lash in some of those things, it was clackety pretty good. But if you tighten the lash up like you should, because they make more power if you tighten the lash up, they weren't quite as bad, but the hydraulic stuff was good. And a 350 horse 327 or a 350 horse 350, those things ran really strong, especially in the little Chevy 2s. they were notorious for beating lots of people with the milder hydraulic version. But the L82 was included in that test because I ran the L79, which is a 350 horse 327, and then the L46, which is a 350 horse 350, all the hydraulic flat tapping cams, and then also the L82, which is basically the lower compression version of these performance motors. As we went into the 70s, compression went down, power went down. This was the emissions era before we started coming back up in the late 70s and into the 80s. We started getting more performance and stuff, but that was a fairly low compression. It was like 9-to-1. On that L82, it had 882 heads, which were not good. Nobody looks back longingly at an 882 head the way that they do at a 461, for instance. It had a Q-jet. It had the L46 camshaft in it. We ran it with headers, and we ran it with a Q-jet carburetor and a Q-jet induction system. And that thing made, on our engine dyno with the electric water pump and that kind of stuff and headers on it, made 313 horsepower and 355 foot-pounds. So it didn't do terrible, but it basically did kind of what if we go get an L31 Vortec headed deal, a truck motor, and put a carburetor and an intake manifold on it, it kind of does that. In fact, I would be surprised if it doesn't make more torque than that. So the hopped up Corvette motor, for that period of time is basically, a truck motor is kind of as good or better than that. But what we did then was we modified it. So we used basically the base short block and then put heads, cam, and intake manifold on it. In this case, we put a set of RHS big heads. They were 220 cc's, more than we needed, but hey, that's what Westech had. They were 64 cc chambers. We brought the compression up to 10-to-1. We put a 274 extreme energy camshaft in it. We put an RPM air gap in it and a Holley 750, and we ran it with the same headers, 1 3/4 headers. And the power was up a lot. It made 100 more horsepower. It made 413 horsepower and 415 foot-pounds of torque. So almost the same torque as horsepower. So it did really well. But then the test that we did after that with the Holley carburetor on there is we put a 1/2-inch spacer on there. And we know spacers affect intake manifolds differently. You put a 1/2-inch open spacer on a single plane like a Victor Jr., which we would have run a lot on these small blocks back in the day. usually with more camshaft in this, but certainly with that kind of cylinder head, that's a big cylinder head, the RHS head, we weren't taking advantage of what that head had to offer. In fact, I would much rather have an airflow research head like a 185 or 195 or that kind of thing on there. And I just think it would be a better choice for it because they have more than enough flow and they always end up making good power. We didn't need that big of a head. But at any rate, that's what we had on there. And with a dual plane intake manifold, we did a 1/2 inch open spacer on it for this one. We have a whole, Westech has a whole bunch of spacers. They have a whole cabinet full of all the different varieties of spacers that you could possibly imagine. And yes, we flipped them over and we'd run them backwards and sideways and all of that. But for this test, this is what we grabbed. We just grabbed a 1/2 inch open spacer, put it on there and ran it. And it did indeed make more power. It wasn't a lot. It was 6 or 7 horsepower at the top. 419 was the peak. Peak torque stayed exactly the same because the tipping point for the spacer versus non-spacer was at that torque peak point, basically. So above 4,100 RPM, we started to see gains in power from the spacer. Below that, below 3,900, because they were basically the same for 200 or 300 RPM. Below that, there were losses. The losses were not as big as the gains were at the top. But you're not going to get a ton of power from something like this anyways. I've had guys tell me, and this always happens when we do a video on something. Oh, I gained 20 horsepower from a spacer. I'm like, you probably didn't. If you did see a change of 20 horsepower from something like that, part of it or most of it probably came from something else. You probably changed something else. Oh, yeah, we added a couple of degrees of timing. Well, or we changed the jetting or whatever. Now, it wouldn't be unusual to have to change the jetting and the carburetor when you put an open spacer on a dual plane, because that's pretty normal, in fact. If you do that, what you do is reduce the signal to it, particularly down low. So normally what you have to do is add a bunch of fuel because it's going to be lean there because it doesn't have a good enough signal to draw the fuel. So you have to add more fuel like artificially by changing the jet size. The signal can increase at the top, though. So sometimes with you adding jet to add the low speed extra fuel flow that you need because you put a spacer on it, now becomes problematic because the signal is strong up at the top. And if the thing was, good before or slightly rich, now it could be way richer. And so this is one of the things that we fight when we're dealing with carburetors. But running the spacer on it, particularly on a dual plane, we do that like we do other things where we're trying to get that last little bit of power. If you look at something and go, oh yeah, it's making 419. Well, we want it to make 420, obviously, or even worse, it's making 399 or 398, and we want it to make 400. Having it be close to a big number is way more important to us for some reason. If it's 399 and it's got to make 400, then yeah, we're gonna play with it a little bit. We might try adjusting lash if it has lash. We might try, lightweight oil, or cooling the motor down or whatever, just and not even so that we could say that it did that, but that's just for us, just so that we feel better, so that it's not a 399.9, that it's a 400. And a lot of times what will happen on the dynos, we'll see a 400 on the readout during the run. It's just that when the dyno grabs each snippet of number at every 100 RPM, the one that it grabbed was not the 400 that happened before or after that. It grabbed the 399.9 one, and that's the one it used to print out. Because I think what it does is go in there and figures, okay, these guys want 400. And we clearly saw a 400, sometimes 2 or 3 of them, but I'm not going to give them that. You know what sounds really nice? This is the dyno talking. You know what sounds really nice, better than 400, is 399.9. Let's give them that. And then the dyno just sits back and says, there you go. Now you're gonna have to do something to make it happen. So we do that. And spacers are one of the things, more so with a dual plane intake manifold than with a single plane. If we have a single plane, very rarely do we try a spacer unless we're doing a dedicated spacer test where we want to try an open spacer versus a 4-hole and do the flippy upside downy thing. If we want to do that, we're doing a spacer test, we could do that on a single plane. Not very often do we have a single plane combination and go, what we need to do is put a spacer on there. On a single or on a dual plane, if we're looking at that and we're at 399, we're like, yeah, we're gonna put a spacer on it, even if it's a 1/2 inch open spacer or a 1 inch open spacer or whatever. We're gonna try that because we want to see that other number, and usually that does happen. But like I said, in this one, there was also a trade-off with that, and that's not unusual in the performance world, a lot of times we put a bigger camshaft in it. Look what all this thing charges hard on the big end, but yeah, look, it's all soft on the bottom end. Same thing with the big turbo. It's all super laggy, but it really storms hard on the big end. All of that stuff. Short runner intake manifolds. There's always the good and the bad, and we unfortunately are left with deciding, hey, is that okay? Am I okay with the trade off there? Is all that going to work? But I'm actually very happy that I got to run that. And honestly, of the three of those motors, the L79, the L46, and the L82, the one that I was happiest about running was the L46. Now, I had heard discussions of the 350 horse 327 was kind of famous. The L79 was kind of famous, especially amongst old timers that I would get lots of information from. And so that was kind of cool. And it was like the hidden secret. Oh, this is the big block killer, because you could put this thing in a lightweight Chevy 2 or whatever, and they would go out and clean house or whatever. People are saying, oh yeah, this is the sleeper kind of thing. And so it's kind of notorious for that. But the 350 horse 350, especially after running it and comparing it to the 327 in the same way that we compared the 365 horse 327 to the LT1, lots more torque from the bigger motor. And so we saw exactly that with basically the smaller cammed versions, because they were still, like 11-1, still had fuelie heads on it, still had a dual plate intake manifold, still had good carburation on them. But the bigger motor just makes more torque, and therefore would be funner to drive, and therefore in an equal car should be faster, right? I kind of think so. And so I was excited about running that L46 because I hadn't ever put one of those together. I thought that was kind of cool. Although the 327 was awesome too. We don't do a lot of 327 stuff when we're doing testing at Westech over these many years now, and we're running a small block Chevy. I'd say the vast majority of them are 350s, which is indicative of what's going on out there in the world. There's more 350s, I think, that they did than any of the other engine sizes. And that would have been the most common one that they put in. Be interesting to see the build numbers on that stuff to see. But I would say that that's kind of more the go-to small block size. And the 327 was not in contention with that. Not a bad motor, just didn't make as many of them as they made 350s, because they did 350s for a lot longer period of time, I'm pretty sure. So let me know. You guys let me know. We've got to get a poll going up here. Very simple. Short, simple, sweet, to the point. Does a carb spacer always add power? Today we went, my wife and my son and I, we went, one of my sons, we went bowling tonight. I was predictably terrible at it. So, but it was fun. It's good to go there, and you get fries from the bowling alley, because when you go to the bowling alley, you gotta get fries, right? I think that's more the reason that we went there than actually to go bowling. But it's good to spend time with your family and get to hang out and laugh laugh at yourself mostly. How's it going, Scott? What's going on? Edward, I made it to the start of the live feed. It is a good day. It was a good day. Yeah, it was a good day. Must have been the sideways spacer video. the sideways ones are difficult. Everybody hit the like button. Turbo Central, what's going on? L82, 175 horsepower, but it feels like 75. I think the L82 is rated at 250, right? L82 power output. when I do a search for L82 power output, I get my video test. I mean my test. 210 horsepower or 210 horsepower, 5,500 RPM, 1973. Interesting. Difference between the L48 and the L82. The L48 was like a base engine. last year. 9-to-1 compression, 205 horsepower output increased to 210 horsepower in 76. 2 years later, the L82 saw its output increase again to 220 horsepower. Yeah, all the way up there. 79 got larger valves, 10.2-to-1 compression, and a new cam, push horsepower to 225, and then 230 in 1980. Wow. I didn't realize that they ran different cams in those. I wasn't aware of that. 230 horse pressure. Near. Good evening, folks. My Lowbuck truck cam arrives tomorrow. Very nice. I like to see that. Like to see good customer service, stuff getting shipped out right away. Does torque count as power? Yes, it does. Have you tried a carb spacer on a sniper like throttle body EFI on a dual plane? I don't know if we have. I don't think I have. I'd have to go back and look at I've only run a couple of those tests on the throttle body EFI stuff. I have done the easy EFI stuff from comp way back then, but I don't know if we did a spacer on it or not. And I'm pretty sure we ran it on a dual plane. I'm thinking that was a small block Ford. I'm pretty sure it was. It was a good day. Yeah, it was a good day. Now you guys are going to have me sing that all night long. All night. Cylinder head upgrade. No, that's not it. Summit cams. Zex, that's good. We like that. Carburetor tuning. CHI. Sanchez, SVO Holdner. What the fire truck is going on here? Springs, that's good. I know I ran that. I'll have to look for it. I know I ran the easy EFI stuff. BPE small block Ford. Oh, here we go. Carburetor is X. Final. Okay, there we go. We did not run a. That's interesting. We did not run a carb spacer on that. No, it adds plenty of volume. Sometimes it doesn't. That helps. Sometimes it doesn't. Yes, a carb spacer does do that, but it also changes signal. But it doesn't change a signal to a throttle body injection because that's run off of a map sensor. Thought they're right around 210. So yep, you're right. You're right on. You're spot on. I was missing a few parts for the sensor. Maybe tomorrow I'll be able to start properly tuning it. Very good. My 74 Monte Carlo 350 was 140 horsepower. Yes. 140 horsepower out of 350. I've never run one that only made that much power. On the engine dyno anyways, the lowest we made, but that had a flat top piston in it. So it would have, if we could have run a lower compression one, 229, I think is the lowest horsepower output that we've run on a 350. I've had a Megadeth Good Morning Black Friday stuck in my head all day. It's weird what sticks in there, right? Mimicking your 540 Wild build with a tunnel ram. I know you've told me, I can't remember though, going from 8.5 to 1 to 10.5 to 1 compression. What sort of gains can you get? You get 3 to 4% per 1 point. So you get between 6 and 8% of percentage gain going with 2 full points. So at 8%, if it was a 500 horsepower motor, you get 40 horsepower. Tough learning curve for the first car. That was with points ignition. I saw Freiburg cut down a divider in RPM non-air gap to make the same power as the air gap with a carb. I just wanted to know if an EFI throttle body would be as sensitive to the spacer. I don't know. I don't know if his gain came from a change in intake design or if it came from the change in fueling. My guess is it came from the change in intake design. It would increase the airflow because both sides would get to breathe from what is now a semi-common plenum. Interesting to try. 230 horsepower probably be down to 140 with all the smog and transmission. Well, not, I mean, right, if you're registering at the tire, that would be a different thing. But the 230 horsepower rating was with all of the smog equipment and exhaust and all that stuff on there. How much bumping compression does GT40P give a stock 302? I don't think it gives any, right? Aren't they the same size chamber as the E7TE head? Wasn't the 352 barrel in the Monza rated low? I thought 140 was the lowest 350 that I'd seen, but maybe there was down at 125. I remember some of the smaller motors, some of the smaller V8s were down pretty low. So Christopher, what's going on with Polaris? They're showing one of the 262s is rated at 110 horsepower. The lowest output small block was in 75 and 76. It was the 262 V8 rated at 110. Nice. That's not very. It's a small motor, so was reference to T. Okay. Megadeth. Okay, I get you. I get you. I got lost there for a second. I'm back. It's all good. The interesting thing on this test also, if you look at the dyno results, we put those big 220 heads on there, and they didn't lose all the low speed torque because the ports are too big. Because that doesn't really happen. I guess you could get them big enough to where that would happen, but I don't know where that would be. We did trade a little bit going to the 225 heads on the small block Ford compared to the 195s. The 210s and the 225s, I think, were the same. There was a little drop going with the full CNC ported 210s versus the ASCAS 195s, but it was not way down low. It was at another part of the curve. I have an RPM non-air gap on a 408 with a cut down divider, hoping to know if a spacer would help. I may not have the clearance for it anyway. I would say cutting the divider down is the equivalent of putting a 1/2-inch spacer on it, because that's what you're doing. You're changing the communication between sides. So now one side isn't dedicated just to those two carburetor openings or the common plenum therein. Now you have one side of the motor being able to breathe through basically all four of the ventures of the carburetor. So if there's somehow a restriction, between one side breathing through two and one side breathing through two, is that a restriction? I think I would argue that if that's the case, then the carburetor is too small. But that's why we try stuff. We try stuff and let's show up and see what happens. But you're right, Edward, that fitment is oftentimes an issue, particularly in intake manifold choice. Even on a high-rise dual plane, just doesn't fit under the hood. A lot of guys can't run an RPM air gap because it's too tall. Well, I could run the low-rise Torquer 2 or one of those. If you look at some of the Corvette intake manifolds, they're really squished down. Some of the factory, like big block Corvette stuff. With a tunnel ramp on a 540 big block for some periodic nitrous usage and only about 300 or 400 shots a lot, would you run dual plates under the carbs or fogger system, cooling effect, atomization, distributor. Well, a 400 shot to me is a lot. So I don't know what is your base power output on the 540. But you can run 200 shots on there on a tunnel ram without any problem. And a 300, 150 shots, that's not that big a deal. Super Sniper on a 408, not a carb. Okay. '75 Monza 350 two barrel with California emissions rate at 125. Yeah, that's pretty low for a 350. Torque 2 small block Chevy wasn't very good. It was not. The Torque 2 small block Ford's not very good either. Looking for 800 at the crank. That's what your 540 does NA. And you want to hit it with a 400 shot? That's should be okay. I think I'd try to hit it with 2 100 shots first and see how that goes. And then do 2 150s and then, work your way up. I don't think you need a fogger setup for that, but you could put really small jets in the fogger setup. I think 25s normally is the smallest they go. I don't know what the torque was, but my VW Rabbit would beat it. Hey, those Rabbits rolled out. Torque 2 for the big block isn't very good. I haven't heard. I mean, I've heard some guys say that they like the Torquer only because that's what they had, and I don't know that they had it to compare to anything else. But I don't think I've had anybody tell me that in testing that the Torquer 2 in any of the engine families has done particularly well. As a single plane, it's not. I haven't seen it be the match of a Victor Jr. or Super Victor, obviously, any of those. And it doesn't do what a dual plane does. RPM air gap stuff is they did a really good job of those, which is why they sold so many of them, which is why everybody knocked them off because they're good intake manifolds. So in that way, it's it's kind of an honor, right? I'm sure that they don't look at it like that. I'm sure they're not feeling that. Switching to Victor Jr. gave me 50 horsepower. Yeah. I wonder if the Monza drivetrain would hold up to anything more than 125 horsepower. What transmission was in those, Scott? Do you know? Did they have a T10 or what did they have manual transmissions in those? I mean, if it had a turbo 350, and obviously that could hold up to more than 125 horsepower. But I don't know what the manual transmissions were. My uncle had a 75 H body 352 barrel, 125 horsepower in California. Save the chassis from bending. Yeah. You could have 2 of those and not bend the chassis. 125 horsepower is really bad. But the nice thing is it's going to be pretty easy to double that power output on a 350. Always start small shots, rich fuel, retarded timing, check plugs, work your way up to get diminished returns, go back 1 or 2 jets, degrees of timing. Yeah, I don't know if it sounded like what you were talking about was that you were not going racing with it. So I don't think I'd go anywhere near those other steps. Just put a safe 100 shot in each one and then a safe 150 shot. And I'd probably call it good at that, but you could try the safe 200 shot. Best was a tunnel ram. Yeah, I haven't seen a single plane beat a tunnel ram yet. You laugh, but I've seen Big Block Vegas twist the unibody up to where the doors wouldn't close tight. Yeah, but not 110 or 25, whatever horsepower small block. Monza transmissions, 4-speed Saginaw M20, manual 5-speed. They did have a manual 5-speed? T50 manual, 3-speed. Turbo Hydro 200? Oh, wow. I've never even heard of the 200 and the 250. I guess I don't I'm not around the the Monza groups very often. I bought my 96 Sierra. It had a spacer under the factory two barrel. It was amusing. Can't imagine it does much on a stock 350. Was it a factory? I've seen the spacers that they put under those. Some of them are gaskets. Some of them have. Did some of those have EGR ports or something on them? Maybe not an EGR for. Well, it might come up through the intake manifold. A big black Chevy in a Malibu, and it broke 2 windshields. My brother had a Pinto that had only 3 wheels touch the ground. It was all twisted steel and sex appeal. I recall the turbo 200s. Rover is in the house. It morphed into a 200R4 that was used in the Grand Nationals. Is that what it came from? See, I didn't know that. I didn't know that they had a 3-speed version of that transmission. Was a Turbo 200 a Power Glide style? My uncle had a Buick Skyhawk. His wife a Chevy Monza, 5-speed. Weird Porsche gate with first opposite reverse. So first opposite reverse. Was it what they call the rally pattern? No, it was aftermarket, probably 1.5 inch tall. Yeah, I don't know what a lot of guys bought that stuff. Guys made lots of money off of those things, off of putting spacers under throttle bodies and stuff, and putting corkscrews and swirlies and all kinds of stuff in there. I don't know how they would do anything. Just a fun cruiser with some pep in the step. Star Chief Executive 4-door sedan. It's 18.6 long, 6.8 wide, land yacht. Oh, okay, yeah. Then I don't know that I would try to do a 400 shot on it. But even with that much power and 2 100 shots, like 200 horsepower with a nitrous, I think it's going to be fun. They also made a Turbo Hydro 180 that was used in Chevettes. That's what the transmission was for the 4-cylinder ones. Saginaw T50. Looks like the big brother of the GTO. I've seen a Turbo Hydro 300 a few times. I knew a guy with a decent 350 and a 4-speed and a 75 Monza hatch. I thought it was the coolest thing ever. Didn't they come with V8s like that? Well, obviously they did. The Turbo Hydro 180 was the worldwide GM gearbox made in West Germany and Australia. It was probably 350 horsepower. That's good. The Monzas are really popular out at Bonneville. Maybe because they were already V8 equipped or something for those guys. And you could put, if it already had the mounts and everything, you could put any kind of small block in there. Ordered a nice spacer the other day from Amazon, and someone tossed a cheap $10 pot metal open spacer in the box. Got a full refund. What spacer were you trying to get? Lots of live action lately. Yep, it's live on live action. According to the wiki, Monza weighed 2,800 pounds. That's pretty light, right? It is pretty light. I always wanted the Super Aero Trans Am because I was always I still am. I'm still a top speed guy for some reason, although it's kind of useless. The German-made one was using Opals, what we call an 8-inch torque converter. Started as an Opal part. Okay. I like the Opal GTs, and I like the Opal Mandas too. Zoo Truck wants to know if you get a Turbo 400 with the gear vendors or just get a 4L80. for his 800. Well, it's going to be 1,000 horsepower or more big block. Scott wants to know if anybody remembers the Monza Mirage. 12 front area, Keith Turk's little Monza, or his big Camaro with a little alloy V8. Magna-fuel anti-reversion plate type spacer. What is anti-reversion? Why would they think reversion is coming up through the throttle body? Do you ever order inferior parts and then improve them? Sheet metal LS intake manifolds. I don't know what you would do to an LS intake manifold. The only things I've ever done to one of those is we got one of those Sniper-esque like fabricated sheet metal manifolds, and we cut it open and then welded radius entries because this one didn't have it. The runners just ended in a cut off sections. I'm like, I'm hoping that this is a mistake because it shouldn't be like this. And if it is, they need to not sell this. So I had Fred, I think from AccuFab, weld on like radius entry openings on those, and we put it back together. But that's the only thing. You can't really make them. I mean, that one you could make better pretty easily because it needed those radius entries on there. But the rest of them are not, I wouldn't do too much to them. Maybe overlooked or not. I'm not looking well enough, but a turbo LM7 using a GT45 turbo aiming for 650 wheel horsepower with the stock water pump suffice, or any recommendations? Yeah, the stock water pump will be okay. I don't know what RPM you're running at. I'd be more concerned about that. If you're running lots of RPM, you can get into cavitation with a stock water pump. Richard, you might like this project. I probably will. Sounds like I am going to. 72 C10. Yep, that's a yes. And I'm purchasing a half-ton express van, 5.3. All-wheel drive, and put the C10 on the all-wheel drive chassis. That is good. That is very cool because that will look awesome, and then you'll be able to like have all the traction that you need. My grandfather had a couple cadets. Were they space cadets? That's right. I got uncle jokes. I want to change the gearing at my bike to go over 200. Ran of RPM at 192. You went 192 on your motorcycle? That's really fast. Opel GT, mini C3 Corvette, just needed a V8 swap, or even a turbo rotary or a turbo four banger. Yeah, see, I'm not quick enough to read those before I respond. The 4L85E will take a lot of power, add ATI input shafts for extra security. Wait till the stock one breaks. My idea was to add flared radius entries and also add plenum volume to some of the cheap stainless intake manifolds. Yeah, the fabricated ones, like the Sniper ones, I don't think adding plenum volume is going to do anything because in my testing with plenum volume, it hasn't really hasn't yielded very much of a power gain. But all of the Sniper ones that I've seen, other than that one set that I think came from the guys at Speedmaster at the time, all of the other ones have radius entries on them. They're at least flared entries. Building a Rambler, that's cool. Small block Chevy 350, 4-bolt main, TBI motor from the 80s. Truck, refreshed with all new gaskets. Should I turbo at 10 pounds or will I blow it up? I don't want to tear it apart. Well, the first thing I would talk to you about is, I don't know why you're set on 10 pounds. If I was going to put a turbo on it and I was concerned about hurting it, I would start out at 5 pounds and then see how that goes and then make sure everything's right and then turn the boost up. If you hurt it, it's not going to be because you have a turbo on it. The turbo doesn't blow stuff up. Turbos don't hurt motors. People hurt motors. And they do that by not having enough fuel, having too much timing, having a hot air entry going into the turbo, not having intercooling, not having enough octane. They do all those things. The turbo itself does probably not going to cause that much stress. Certainly not at low boost. And a small block Chevy, you can certainly run boost on. Opel GT is a neat little car, yes. .350 has headers and a carb with intake, but other than that, it's stock. That's what most of them do, because when 350s were, not that they're not popular now, but when everybody had them in their cars driving around, more people would do the same things that we do now. External things. You'd put a carburetor, an intake manifold, maybe a recurve distributor. Headers would certainly be popular, and a dual exhaust, that kind of thing. And then fewer people, although some would go in and change the heads or camshaft to it. Opel GT was also marketed as a baby Corvette. The visions of cutting down the middle and widening it by 10 inches, it would look like a Ferrari dyno from the back. Edward, that's fast. I've had mine over 175. I wish Jaguar used the Opel GT headlights and the XKE with 68 headlamps. Okay. Richard, the Summit Stage 4 cam you ran the LS3. What converter stall would you recommend? Are you running it in an LS3 or are you running it in a 5.3? If you're running it in LS3, I think I probably would go like 3,000 on that one. Turbo Dorito would be wild on a mini C3. Scrolling. Low end torque breaks parts, but lean is mean, right? Turbo bad, nitrous good. Turbo's good. I would go the other way with the nitrous. Nitrous also good, but neither one of them are good when there's too much of them. Too much of a good thing. Little Buck truck cam and number 3 on order. And before the price increase, there you go, man. We appreciate it. Buy all you want. We'll make more. I'm not set on any certain amount of boost for the 350. I just want to pep it up without worrying about camshaft heads, etc. I have a lot of room in the engine bay, so I might as well add easy power. There you go. 4L80 question is what is going to be used and tune it once in a while once it's installed. Yes, definitely add ring gap. Don't run it lean. Don't have too much timing. Don't try to run an 87 octane. Can we see some Mopar B engine stuff? 383 and 400 big blocks, NA with some 7,000 RPM range. I don't, and have never had either one of those motors. I don't know that I've only ever seen a 383, I think, at West Tech when Dulcich brought one over. I have a turbo 408 and it's holding up well. I added a brake and a pro torque converter. For 7,000 RPM, you're gonna have to have better heads than stock ones, that's for sure. The headlamps up looking. Opel GT was like the 928S. I'm stuck. I need help. I got an LS2. I'm putting in a Cutlass. I want it as a fun daily car. I want to make 550 to 600 horsepower. Should I just put a small turbo on it? How much would a small turbo build cost? Yeah, you're not going to make, you can make 550 horsepower NA with an LS2. That's a cam and a good intake manifold, and you should be able to get there. You get really close to 550 horsepower NA. It's going to be a big cam, though, and so the drivability is not going to be great. Very easy to get there with a stock motor and a turbo. You're going to have a pump. You're going to have injectors. You're going to have a turbo, and then you're going to have the exhaust manifolds and all that stuff that go along with the turbo. Art Fiber said a while back, plethora of LS swaps made the small block and big block Chevy cool again. What do you mean, that there's so many of them that now people want to do small blocks and big blocks? Or should I just do NA head cam intake swap? Yeah, you can. I have lots of 6-liter stuff up there for you to look at. You can port those stock heads, which are 243s, which those are good. You can put a fast intake manifold on it, which is what I'd recommend. And then you could put a camshaft in it. There's lots of different camshafts. If you want to make 550 horsepower, the camshaft is going to have to be pretty big. So it's going to have to be like a BTR, at least a red hot, and maybe like their stage 4 LS3 camshaft. Charlie Brown, what's going on? Mopar B is a big block with small block heads. Yeah, but I have to say, I do like the 383 and the 400, I think, more so than the 440 if you're limited by cylinder head flow. Mopar people hoard their stuff. I did a low buck turbo 4.8 in my 55 Buick. Total cost is around $2,000 with all the supporting systems. VS 7875 on a 4.8 with ring gap and a mild cam. That's right. Mopar, my old pig ain't running. Had an E38 cam. Actually, still have the ECM. Oh, E38 ECM. Sorry about that. I thought it said cam. I've built turbo 400s, but building my first 4L80 now would be a full manual valve body. Okay. Thanks again for all the videos. I've gone back and forth, unlikely for the next year or so, on what turbo setup to go with on a Coyote. So far, thinking 76, 75. That's probably a good choice. We're looking at the 76, 75 stuff. We're looking at the new versions with the better wheels, and so we want to look at that. And I want to test it for response rate and stuff. I can solder and have done electrical assembly. Speaking of injectors, can I buy big injectors and just tune it for the power application? Is there such a thing as too big? Not really in the range of power that we talk about here on this channel, because you're not talking to, I'm not really talking to people that are going to put 2000 cc's or 2500 cc's or 3000 cc injectors in there. Then you would have an issue with, you could have an issue with getting them to operate down at a very low pulse width for idle and stuff, particularly if you're doing it on a small engine that doesn't need hardly any fuel under those conditions. So the bigger the injector and the less fuel that they need, that's a really big gap, and it's hard to do. But for what we're talking about, if you put in a deck of 80s or the injectors that we have on richardholderperformance.com, when we have 80s and we have 1000 cc injectors, those kinds of things you can easily tune and drive around with. That's not a problem. Yes, he was saying LS swaps are so common that seeing something other than an LS is cool. 4L80 and 400s are similar. In fact, they share a lot of the same parts. How many portholes are in a 55 Buick, 3 or 4? Are there Buick guys here? To answer the question of RPM, I'm thinking 6500 max. Choosing the BTR stage 2 cam due to your video where you demonstrated its balance of low end performance and moderate power to top with a GT45. Paul, what size motor is that? I can't remember now. Dean says the Buick has 3 portholes per side. Well-built 440 sound insane. The LS2 turbo build. Let's see. Seem more fun to drive. So how much would a turbo LS2 build cost roughly on stock internals with parts and labor? I don't know. I don't know what the costing is on all that, because I don't really know what you have. Like, are you going to tune it with the factory ECU? And do you have injectors? Do you have a pump? What are all the things that you need? So I don't know. The one thing I would recommend you do is take it apart and put ring gap in it if you're going to put a turbo on it. Well-built 426 Hemi sound good too. Yeah. I have a 56 coupe with a 4-port hole in it. It's loaded with extra electric stuff. Gear vendors turbo 400 second gear overdrive is supposed to have killer acceleration, wide open throttle. Always wanted gear vendors. I know, just so you could switch between different gearings. You can have in between gears. With a cam on an LS, what's the story on lifters mild to wild? What's the reason on price for mild to wild? I don't know. We have lifters for sale on our thing. We use the LS7 lifters, and I have used those, and also stock stuff from the wrecking yard and other lifters like sealed power stuff and things. I've never had a problem with lifters. So some of the high price stuff could be short travel lifters. And so you would hope that I don't know, maybe the machining tolerances or the parts might be better. I was wrong. Fact checking. All Roadmaster counted 4 each side, and 55 to 57 Centuries and Supers had 4. Paul Delgado. So I would not recommend you have a stage 2 camshaft in a 5.3. And a 5.3 with a GT45, I would recommend a smaller cam. If you already have your cam, you could try to use it. It's going to be soft. It's not going to be strong down low. Tavares just dropped a video, and I need a Holden. All right. Richard, can the Westec dyno handle a top alcohol motor? I think that they're, I don't know how much power that thing makes. They have the new, I want to say it's a Black Widow dyno or something like that will hold a lot more, but I don't know that they care about running engines like that. What RPM range do you like a turbo motor to operate at? The way I can make sure I have plenty of fuel system for it. The fuel system is not going to be RPM dependent. It's going to be power dependent. So the RPM range and the turbo have nothing to do with each other, really. The RPM range of your motor is dictated by the things that you have in your motor. So what camshaft do you have? What port heads do you have? What intake manifold specifically do you have? And then where that thing makes power, the turbo is just going to make power there too. It's just going to have, you're just going to have more of it with the turbo, and you'll have more fuel required for that. I have 7 really good LS7 lifters laying around, but not eight of them, or not 16 of them. I think a 300M output shaft would be fine. 300M stuff is really good. Remember the Doug Nash 4+1? Rick at Westec has a couple of those. He has one in his 427 powered big block 55 Chevy that I think he has. Car weighs 4,500 pounds. Rear tires are 31, 18, 15. It's kind of a pro street freak. All right. Also, I didn't quite catch you saying, why don't you run roller rockers on an LS? I just heard you mention that yesterday. They're not necessary. The factory rockers are already a roller fulcrum, just not a roller tip. The roller tip isn't necessary. There's lots of stock rock. We ran the one that we ran to 8,000 RPM was a stock rocker one. You just don't need them for the thing that you're doing here. The only time I recommend those, we have tried to find more power with stuff when we tested them. You have to have a lot of spring rate for those because they're very heavy. And also on cylinder heads that don't have powdered metal guides, that have bronze guides. And when you have high lift stuff, you tend to side load the valve and it wears the guide out. So on those, we do a roller tip setup. I looked at gear splitting for my 80C30 with an SM465. I think I'll swap transmissions to something modern. How do the smaller CFM Dominators drive on the street? I don't think I've ever done any street driving on it. On my Engine Masters motor, I use a 750 Dominator on it. Doug Nash 4+ came in. Yeah, it was the manual trans options in the Corvettes. There's nothing wrong with the 4L80E. Cleater is having trouble finding someone to dyno the Eagle. I believe Fuel Tech did it. He did run it on there. They ran a chassis dyno where he got over 5,000 horsepower, but didn't get to the record, I don't think. I just know you don't want them from cylinder number 8 on that engine. Okay. 4+3. Mr. Dyno, I would prefer to do business with anybody else. Uh-oh, warm and fuzzy. 84 to 88. So in the Crossfire cars and then up into the L98 stuff. Where's the ported kegger intake manifold at? I don't have that anymore. I sent that back. It's on your page looking at LS2 head comparison, 706, 799, and 823. Thinking of buying the 823s and porting them with a cam and LS3 intake, but can I make 550 horsepower with a stock 706 ported? Yes, if you take a look at the testing that I did on the LY6, when we put a set of 225 trick flow heads on, we made more than 550 horsepower with a fast manifold and those ported cathedral port heads. Properly ported 706 heads will also do that. Like if you look at the stuff that Total Engine Airflow has, if you're hand porting them and you're not as good as the guys at Total Engine Airflow, it's going to be a lot harder for you to get there. But professionally ported sets of those heads can definitely get there. but it will be pretty easy for you to get there even without. But if you put A23s on there and didn't port them and put the right cam in it, you're going to almost be there. When we ran the LY6 with an LS3 intake manifold or the LY6 intake manifold and the 821 heads and put that was a comp 459 or 469 camshaft in it, it made like 543. So it was right there. And we didn't do any porting on the heads or milling, which is also be a good idea. How attainable do you think it would be to reach 600 wheel horsepower with a 5.3 and a small cam down a stage 2 I mentioned earlier with the GT45 turbo? Well, the nice thing about Mr. Delgado, the nice thing about this is that with any camshaft, you can max out that turbo. You could max out that turbo with a stock camshaft. So you can make all the power that turbo has the ability to make without putting a big camshaft in it, without putting any camshaft in it. We ran a 5.3 with my low buck truck camshaft in it, which is really good for low speed response and would be the cam that I would recommend. That style cam, my cam or Truck Norris or Chupacabra, any of those smaller cams, I would recommend over the camshaft that you're looking at, particularly for a GT45 turbo. But with an even bigger turbo and that camshaft, we made 900 horsepower and we just stopped there because it was at 17 pounds. And that particular turbo probably would have gone to 1,000 and the camshaft wouldn't ever hold it back. The turbo dictates what the power is. The nice thing about the small cam is you can make all the power that you want. It doesn't stop you from making power. The turbo dictates that. But with a smaller cam, you just get more low speed response, which is way more enjoyable for 99% of the people. There's no transmission mount on a C4 Corvette. They use an aluminum C-beam trans to Dana IRS diff. Viper uses a similar layout. I would actually pay more and buy from somebody with a good attitude. Who has the bad attitude, Scott? What company is it? Gear vendors are awesome. You can split all 3 gears, make 400 a 6-speed kind of. How's our pole doing? Does a carb spacer always add power? 58% saying no, because you know why? Because the word always in there. Always doesn't always work. It does not. Trust me, I know. I always know. No, I do not. I have a complete C4 suspension laying around. I like the suspensions on those cars. Thanks for the advice. Just want to compete against those all-motor 5-liter F-150s. Appreciate the help. I'll look into the water pump. Yeah, go to my store, get a low buck truck cam and springs, put your GT45 turbo on there. You're going to be doing just fine. But a tighter LSA is always better, isn't it? The low buck truck camshaft has a tight LSA. But yes, that lots of people do say that. Mid-range torque wins more races than peak horsepower. Tell me I'm wrong. I would, if you go to the drag strip a lot, and if you looked at all of the data, whoever reaches the 60-foot mark first, there's a real high percentage that guy wins. I did an exception. Any cam you like is always a turbo cam. They all work. See, you tested TFS 225s, made 570. I'm going to try and see if I can stick with what I've got now, which is 706s. My motor, and it says 550 horsepower. I need to go with 4 draws. Is that true? Well, if you look at that, if you look at all of the testing, the hundreds and hundreds of tests that we ran on that LY6, and by the way, that's also the motor that we made 1,543 horsepower with. That's also the stock block, or the stock bottom end that we made all that horsepower with, and had, I don't know, 70 or 80 runs over 1,000 horsepower with twin turbos on it. That's all that same motor. And that motor's still alive. So no, you don't need Ford stuff for that. For 550 horsepower NA, I wouldn't ever do that. I've heard that Lonnie at Extreme Automatics builds good stuff for 480s. Next LS project for a customer, I will build one of your cams. I'll buy one of the cams. Okay. I mean, obviously I'm selling my stuff, but you guys know that all the stuff that I've been recommending over the years, I recommend small cams for turbos. And if you look at it from a customer standpoint, if you can buy a Truck Norris or a Chopacabra or a little chopper or whatever the other ones are from Cam Motion and Summit Racing, if you look at the cost of all of those, you can buy my cam and springs for way less than that. And it does what those others do. So from a performance standpoint, it's that. And then from a cost standpoint, it's just even better. The Gear Vendor's overdrive drag racing version was rated at 2,000 horsepower. Are any of the drag and drive guys running those? Wait, you mean for an S480 turbo on a 4.8, you don't recommend a BTR Stage 4? Well, I would recommend a BTR Stage 4 only if they didn't have a Stage 5. Is that the biggest that they have? If I was drag racing and wanted to run lots of RPM, I would pick a cam for that. But for street or even street strip, and particularly a small turbo like that, Stage 5 is the 5-force cam. That's right. That's right. Big John Steele, L82. We did some L82 discussions tonight. I know a guy with the BTR Stage 4 cam. Even Brian shakes his head. That we've had that discussion for years and years and years. He's like, yeah, we have a Stage 1, 2, 3, 4. And in most cases, a Stage 4 cam may not even be but 5 or 6 horsepower more than the Stage 3 cam. And on a small motor like a 4.8 or a 5.3, maybe none at all. But because it's more, because the 4 is higher than the 3, people will buy that. What's the best nope rope to get my little kids 4 and 6 can handle? What part of the country are you in? Are you just going to go catch it? All the nope rope guys run Proline Hemis. Are you going to go, if you're going to go catch it, almost all of the snakes that you would go catch are fairly nice. I like king snakes. I like gopher snakes, but I don't know what region you're in. Alex Taylor managed to break a Gear Vendor's in 55 Chevy, so they started to make them stronger. How much power will a Lenco take? Don't they use Lencos in Pro Stock? Pro Stock. Did they leave those? Did they use those in Pro Stock? Turbo engines are always easier on parts because you have fewer coasting cylinders. Exhaust pressure helps that. Depends on shock loading. But this one goes to 11. That's it exactly. In the No Name Nationals, we have a John Cope Racing in India builds more automatics. I think my cam is somewhere between a TSP 3 and 4. So there's a 3.5. And if I were you, I'd call it a 3.75 just to throw people off. Custom made. Uh-oh. It's not a shelf cam. It's a custom cam. How much power will an ankle handle? Yes, exactly. A coastal Taipan. I don't think you want that. I don't think you want a fierce snake. I don't think you want a king brown. I don't think you want any of those to go play with. $11:58, 2 minutes to midnight. Stage 3.14. Ooh, throws the pie out there. I like it. Trick with the Lenco is if you need to hold more power, you just add another Lenco. Lenco and Lenco action. Zoo Truck, the oldies, has a striped garter snake. We catch a lot of garter snakes too, but certainly initially on, garter snakes, I find them to be more bitey than gopher snakes or king snakes. King snakes and gopher snakes tend to calm down faster than a garter snake does. So we didn't like having growing up. I didn't like having garter snakes as pets, but the other ones were very nice. I was thinking about a common little brown snake. Not sure the name. They're water snakes, if maybe by you. Those are also arbitey, so I wouldn't pick that. Arbitey is like a little cam here, exactly. It's like boosty goodness. Garter snakes keep getting in my house somehow. They proliferate. There's lots and lots of garter snakes. If you've ever seen a garter snake boil, there's just, especially when they come out for mating, they're nuts. Water moccasins are not good. And the bad thing is that, and this is obviously Mother Nature by design, a lot of the water snakes look an awful lot like water moccasins. 5 stick leg Verolinka garter snakes look awesome. They can often bite off more than they can chew. I caught one when we were trout fishing and we were catching like brookie trout in this it's fairly small pond, not a pond, but a creek. I'm not going to call it a river because it's a creek. I mean, you could step across it in most places. So it was not very big. And when we first went there, I'm like, this is where we're trout fishing? I'm like, there's not going to be anything here. Like, look at that. I said, I'd be happy if we catch like some tadpoles and pollywogs and stuff. But there were trout there. And we caught, I don't know, we had 5 or 6 of them or whatever on a stringer. And we finally came to a fairly, it's probably like 10 or 15 feet, a pond area where the water had emptied into. And so we set the stringer in there and we started fishing some more. And we came back and there was a garter snake attached to one of the trout. I mean, this garter snake was about this big and the trout was way more than he was ever going to be able to. I know snakes can open their mouth pretty wide, but this guy he was not letting go either. He was like, oh no, I caught this trout fair and square. I'm like, dude, he's on a stringer. No, I didn't see it that way. That I caught this guy. Totally caught him. I snuck up on him. The garter snake lets me know I have a lot of earthworms in my garden. Poor bitey snakes, just hungry, trying to make a living. Well, in our case, when they see us and we try to catch them, they're just being defensive. They're just think that they're being attacked and eaten. So, but we're not going to do that. There. Got 1 more minute. Did I ever say 1 more minute? I think I did. So make sure go watch the video that I put up on all the M90 stuff, all M90 on the M90 action. And then go to richardholderperformance.com for all your injector, lifter, camshaft, spring, shirt. What else do we have? Lifter trays. We've got lots of stuff. I wanted to have lifter trays because for a long time, I was not recommending those. And then I'm like, this is a real thing. This is kind of a problem. And as much as I love junkyard motors and as much as I'm adamantly against changing stuff on a junkyard motor, just putting it all back together with all the stuff that we have, the lifter trays, if you take the heads off and you're doing ring gap, lifter trays should be part of your thing. And lifter trays are cheap. They're like 20 or 25 bucks or something like that. That's definitely a go-to thing. Having already had lifters rotate on high mileage junkyard motors, I'm a little concerned with my 350,000 mile thing out here. Look, Mom, this one's going to be a dyno tester. If I ever get a Viper, I'm going to get a place that says bitey. That'd be good. A touch bitey. Do you know, worst case, nukes, Northern California is one best survivable in the United States? You got to do the twin M90 on an LS. Do you do anything to recondition junkyard lifters? If I take the whole motor apart and we're doing ring gap in them, what we'll do sometimes is I'll clean them and then put them in fresh oil and then they go back in. Most of the times, and in fact, I did this with all of the Big Bang LS motors. I'm pretty sure. I think I did it with all the Big Bang motors. We ran the motor ahead of time and made sure that the motor was a running motor. Because the last thing I wanted to do was I didn't want to take it all apart and rebuild it because I couldn't rebuild it into a junkyard stock bottom end motor. It had to be that. So it had to be working. So we put it on the dyno. We ran it. Okay, yeah, it's all stock. It's a stock 5.3 or a 4.8 or whatever. And now we're going to upgrade it with the head cam and intake manifold. We're going to put ring gap in it. But it had to be a runner before that. So if it was a runner before that, I wasn't really that concerned with freshening the lifters. If I was putting something back together, like to swap into my truck, I probably would do that. I didn't know if porting oil holes or something was a thing. I don't do any of that. Like I said, the rebuild part of that for lifters is putting a new lifter tray in. Rat snakes are good. I do like those. A rat snake is basically our gopher snake. And rat snakes can get big too. Rat snakes and fox snakes, and and bull snakes are a little bit more bitey, but a lot of those are, I'd call them all variants of kind of our gopher snake. The gopher snake looks like they look an awful lot like in our area. They look like the rattlesnakes. They look like the westerns or northern Pacific rattlesnakes that we have here, because they're all, they have spots on them like that. And they'll even flare out and triangulate their head, and they even will rattle their tail, and they'll rattle it in leaves. If they're hiding in an area that has leaves, they'll rattle it in there. But they'll have a little red tip that they'll rattle the thing, and they'll coil up and I'm bitey, super bitey. I'll jump on and get you by the throat. And they're just, it's a defensive posture. They're just trying to protect themselves because, like I said, everything out there eats snakes. And so they're like, hey, this is a huge dude, whatever, he's 5 foot, 6 foot, whatever he is, but he's a lot bigger than I am. And so I don't want him to eat me. And so they'll do the lot, and they mimic rattlesnakes. And so, unfortunately, a lot of them get killed. I mean, I think people kill snakes anyways, which is terrible. But they do that because, that was a rattlesnake. I'm like, yeah, it would have been a rattlesnake if it would have had rattles on the back of its tail. It's pretty easy to know that. And the nice thing is, in the area where we live, short of some weird thing escaping from somebody's, house that he had a cobra or whatever, the only kind of snake that you have to worry about that has venom is a rattlesnake. So if it's got a rattle, or if it's rattling, hey, that's a rattlesnake. Every other snake that you find, king snake, gopher snake, sharp tail, ringneck, whatever else you find, you just go pick those up. If they bite you, then they calm down. They're like, oh, that's cool. This guy's cool, man. Sorry about that, bro. Sorry about the bitey thing. As far as timing components, OE replacements have done over the time with forced induction. On the junkyard motors, we don't replace the timing chain. If you're going to do that and you want to replace it, just get the good German chain, and then you can get new gears and stuff. Everybody sells that stuff. Like Lefty on Sesame Street, the snake guy who tried to sell Ernie a bottle of air. You should look up the fishing garnet channel. Florida guy grabbing all sorts of snakes. I watch a couple of tin flipping guys in Georgia. And there's a couple of guys that have gone down to Florida and gone into the Everglades. And I watch a couple of those guys, like the who is it? The Python Cowboy guy. I think I've watched his stuff. I know a few snakes that have arms and legs. These guidelines are not applicable to Australia. No, you guys have everything over there. In fact, I wonder I don't know if this is the case or not. I'd be curious to know. You might know if you have a higher percentage of venomous snakes than non-venomous snakes. I've experienced turning the lifter tray I got on Amazon earlier this year and had to rebuild my engine. Yeah, I don't recommend getting cheap lifter trays. I get the GM ones, and the ones that we sell are either BTR or GM, and so we don't get cheap ones of those. Of an LQ9 being bored out to 6.2. No, I don't recommend that. Upgraded springs with throttle body should run on my LS6 intake. Is also getting a sloppy stage 2 cam. I make sure to have that thing sonic checked to make sure that you have a thick enough cylinder on there, because I don't recommend boring it out to a 4165. And the throttle body that you're putting on there needs to match the throttle body opening in your LS6 intake manifold, which unfortunately is not very big. I think it's only 78 or 80 millimeters. Found a rattlesnake in Toledo before it was on a tennis court. I believe someone had a pet in Toledo, Ohio. You guys have rattlesnakes there. We have a lot of water moccasins and cottonmouths. Yeah. We saw a whole bunch of those when we were in Florida. They're both bitey and fighty. Yeah, there's stuff in Australia. I don't, and that's the difficulty for me, is if I go to other states. Like when I went to Florida, I just did research. I'm like, okay, what things am I going to run across here? Because I'm going to see a bunch of snakes that I don't know about. Because all the snakes are out here. I've caught all of them, and I know what they are. And like I said, the only one we have to worry about rattles at you. So it tells you, hey, look, I'm a rattlesnake. Don't do this. And they have rattlesnakes in Florida. Like we got lucky enough. I saw an Eastern Diamondback. I know what that looks like, and that's awesome. And we caught it. It was a little baby, and those are cool. But water moccasins, we don't have those around here, so we had to learn what those are. And then you have to learn what the difference between a water moccasin and a regular water snake is, and so we have to learn that. And then, oh, by the way, there's in all these places that you're looking at, there's gators around there too. 20 foot as close as I want to get to a snake. No, I always run up and catch them. I stop on the freeway and pull off on the freeway and get out of my car and go back and see if I can save a snake that's on the freeway. They're usually on the side of the road, and more times than not, they've already been run over. But I want to find out if I can save them. I save them. Yep, I'm a snake guy. And on that note, it is time to go. But I will see you guys all tomorrow. I'm going to see if tonight, if I can figure out another video to do on the last day, because tomorrow's New Year's Eve. You got to do it up. I'll see you guys all tomorrow. Tomorrow.